Tonight, the leaders of America and Israel try to reassure their citizens that they are winning the war. But with oil and gas facilities on fire across the region and prices surging, they cannot control the global markets. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu tried to project a united front after the U.S. president insisted Israel acted alone in attacking Iranian gas facilities.
Israel acted alone against the Slawiya gas compound. Fact number two, President Trump asked us to hold off on future attacks, and we're holding out.
Two leaders trying to do damage control after Iran then retaliated with force against its neighbors. So could Gulf nations soon join the war? We'll discuss that tonight. Plus, is Israel carrying out war crimes in southern Lebanon? We'll have a special investigation. In the West Bank, there are no sirens and no shelters for civilians when Iranian missiles fly overhead. We're going to hear from a friend of these three women killed in a beauty salon by falling shrapnel. And first they were traitors, now they're being welcomed home as heroes. So why did these five footballers decide to return to Iran? That's all coming up on The World with me, Barbara Serra. Good evening. We begin tonight with two men who've often had a complicated relationship, but who nearly 3 weeks ago agreed to go to war against Iran. Their military operations were aptly named. Each day, under Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion, Iran has been bombarded, its leadership decapitated, and thousands of people killed. But now oil and gas prices are soaring again, and Donald Trump is keen to emphasize that it was his Israeli counterpart who decided to bomb Iran's gas facilities. Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that tonight and denied pushing the U.S. president to go to war.
And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on. President Trump always makes his decisions on what he thinks is good for America, and may I add, I think what is also good for future generations. In this case, those interests are absolutely clear, and so is the clarity of our achievements.
But there is a different story in Washington. If you've been watching this week, you'll remember Joe Kent, who resigned from a crucial intelligence post because of his concerns about the conflict. Here's what he's been saying about Israel's influence.
There was no intelligence that said, hey, on whatever day it was, March 1st, the Iranians are going to launch this big sneak attack. They're going to do some kind of a 9/11 Pearl Harbor, et cetera. They're going to attack one of our bases. There was none of that intelligence. The Israelis drove the decision to take this action.
We'll be live in Jerusalem, Riyadh, and Washington in a moment. But first, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has been hearing from an Iranian foreign ministry spokesman in Tehran and sent us this report.
As if this war wasn't worrying enough, it is now escalating again dramatically. Massive explosions in Saudi Arabia followed others at a major gas plant in Qatar, hit by Iran after Israel did this, an unprecedented strike on an Iranian gas field causing substantial damage. The Saudis condemned the Iranian attacks.
It doesn't believe in talking to its neighbors. It tries to pressure its neighbors. And what I can say categorically, that's not going to work. The kingdom is not going to succumb to pressure. And on the contrary, this pressure will backfire.
The war so far has been between Iran and Israel and America. The fear is Gulf countries now actively joining in the fighting too. Overnight, we witnessed more attacks on Tehran. The Iranian Red Crescent released footage of the impact to one residential neighborhood, rescue workers pulling a child from the rubble. But after almost 3 weeks of bombardment, Iran remains as defiant as ever, even as its leaders are still being assassinated one after another. As the escalation over attacks on energy targets gathered momentum, we went to Iran's foreign ministry to seek comment. The message here was uncompromising. The other side must back down first.
You cannot expect a country that is under military aggression to exercise restraint. Do you think it would be really realistic to offer olive branch to those who want to behead you? They are killing our elites. They are targeting our leaders. So this killing spree has to stop.
Donald Trump has urged both Israel and Iran not to attack gas facilities as alarm mounts over the impact on energy prices. What's most worrying is sources here telling us there is no diplomatic process underway to defuse these mounting tensions. We are, it seems, as close as we've ever been to a regional war between Iran and its neighbours, as well as America and Israel, with energy supplies that we all depend on very much at stake. As another day passes in this unpredictable war, with no end in sight, the outlook is darkening. Without some kind of de-escalation, which currently seems unlikely, we will all be affected. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Tehran.
Well, coming up, we'll be live in Washington with David Blevins. But first, let's go to Jerusalem and speak to our correspondent there, Alex Rossi. Alex, the Israeli Prime Minister tried to do two things today, didn't he? To reassure Israelis that the war was being won, but then also to deny those claims we've all been hearing that he misled Washington as ridiculous.
Yeah, this was a wide-ranging press briefing that he gave, speaking for, nearly an hour. To American media and also Israeli media. Now, the war on day 20 is reaching an inflection point, and many people are asking questions about strategically where it's going. So he wanted to hammer that message, particularly for domestic consumption here in Israel. He said that Israel is achieving its goals. It won't be able to, the Iranians, enrich uranium anymore or produce ballistic missiles. That's one of the key things. There's three key points here. The second thing is eliminating the leadership. They're well on the way to do that. The third was a bit more vague, talking about regime change. And at the moment, he says that that really is going to be up to the Iranian people. But in terms of the messaging for the Americans, he wanted to push back against this narrative, which is gathering steam stateside, that Donald Trump was dragged into this war at Israel's behest. This is what he had to say.
Well, I misled no one, and I didn't have to convince President Trump about the need to prevent Iran from developing its nuclear program, putting it underground, and being able to launch nuclear-tipped missiles at the United States. He understood that. He explained it to me. I didn't explain it to him.
Well, there's also a great deal of confusion about the Israeli attack on the South Pars gas field. The Americans say they didn't know anything about it. Israeli officials were briefing here that actually it was done in coordination. But Netanyahu also threw Donald Trump a bone when it came to that. He claims now that Israel acted alone and Donald Trump tried to stop them afterwards.
Alex Rossi with the latest there from Jerusalem. Alex, thank you. Let's bring in our U.S. correspondent, David Blevins. David, we're just hearing there from Alex the confusion over that attack. Well, the U.S. president appeared to be on the back foot today after Israel's decision to bomb Iran's gas field.
Yes, another contradiction, this one in real time in the Oval Office. Last night, President Trump had posted on Truth Social that the United States knew nothing of Israel's plan to attack the South Pars gas field. But when asked today if he had discussed it with Benjamin Netanyahu, he replied, "Yes, I did. We get on great, but act independently. He does some things we wouldn't do." So denial online, but an admission of sorts on camera. And then a US official confirmed that Israel had indeed given the United States advance notice of its plan to strike last night. President Trump was also asked if he planned to put boots on the ground. He said no, then qualified that by adding, if I was, I wouldn't tell you. That's reminiscent of what he said 3 weeks ago when he was asked if he was about to start bombing Iran, and he said no, but if I was, I wouldn't tell you. All of this happened during a very tricky bilateral bilateral meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Of course, Japan being one of the allies who refused to send support when the president asked for it to the Strait of Hormuz. Diplomatically, she was treading very carefully, condemning Iran and expressing confidence in President Trump. But there was a jaw-dropping moment when a visiting journalist asked the president why he hadn't given his allies advance notice of his plans to start this war. Let's just listen to how he replied.
One thing you don't want to signal too much, you know, when we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay? Right? You know, he's asking me, do you believe in surprise? I think much more so than us.
You heard the audible gasps there, and then the room quickly fell silent. So at least some people there appear to appreciate the breach of protocol, the president having cited one of the darkest moments in the history of US-Japanese relations. But of course, within a few minutes, his own son, Eric, had posted his father's comments online with 2 laughing emojis and the words, "One of the greatest answers ever given to a reporter."
Yeah, definitely another memorable moment from a Trump news conference with a global leader. David Blevins with the latest there from Washington. David, for the moment, thank you. And now let's go live to Riyadh and speak to NBC's chief international correspondent there, Keir Simmons. Keir, the real anger was felt in the Gulf today because of the extensive damage to several sites. So how likely is it that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE could actually join the war against Iran?
I would say it's still unlikely, but more likely than it was when you listened to the Saudi Arabian foreign minister yesterday night, late into the night. Actually, it wasn't even the night, it was 2 or 3 in the morning here. By the time that news conference happened, after he had convened a meeting of foreign ministers from across this region, when you listened to him and you heard the barely disguised fury over the attacks by Iran on Saudi Arabia's oil installations and on its neighbours, you got an understanding of just the extent to which these countries that neighbour Iran, the Gulf countries, Arabic countries, feel they're coming close to the point of no return. The Saudi Arabian foreign minister, very angry at the fact that when that meeting of foreign ministers was happening here in the past 24 hours, there were Iranian missiles overhead. We got the alarms on our phones. We heard the booms. Even as the Turkish foreign minister was walking through the hotel lobby, we could hear those interceptions. Saudi Arabia saying it intercepted every missile that was fired. But I would say, too, that there are different views. And I think that goes to the question of just how difficult it is for Iran's neighbours to kind of figure out how to get to an off-ramp. So we've heard from the foreign minister of Oman writing in The Economist, suggesting that the countries that are allies and partners of the United States need to find a way to help the Trump administration to extricate itself from this conflict. And on the other hand, we've heard the Qataris condemning the attacks by Iran, but at the same time, in a statement just today, the Qatari Prime Minister suggesting that one of the reasons that this needs to be de-escalated quickly is because it benefits certain countries, not talking about Israel, but clearly inferring that all of this is to the benefit of Israel.
Keir Simmons, NBC's chief international correspondent, live from Riyadh. Keir, thank you. Well, the impact of what is going on in the Middle East is being felt around the world. Global energy prices have soared, fueling concerns here in the UK that inflation could rise. Typically, when inflation spikes, well, the Bank of England responds, but it's decided for now to hold interest rates. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has this analysis.
So extraordinary events just recently in this war. Have a look at this. This is showing you a map of all of the gas and oil fields in the Persian Gulf. And focus in particular on this one, actually. I'll zoom into it. Now, this is known as the North Field, or at least the Qatari part of it's known as the North Field. You can see it's in the middle of the sea, basically, and under the seabed you have an enormous amount of gas. And that gas is partly shared, just because of the way that the maritime borders work, partly with Iran, so that's the Iranian chunk of it, they call it South Pars, and then that's the Qatari chunk of it. It's the same gas field, basically, but they've got their kind of, pipes sticking in from the other direction. And that's why it's so significant. You've had that Israeli attack on the Iranian facilities, and then Iran sending missiles through to Ras Laffan. Now, Ras Laffan is the single biggest liquefied natural gas production place anywhere in the world. And this has massive bearings on just the amount of gas we can expect around the world in the coming years. As I say, very few other places have as much. And that's why you're now seeing this borne out on wholesale gas prices. So this is the UK gas price, and it's already gone up quite sharply as a result of the attacks that we've seen so far. But now look at what's happened now. Up 99% actually in that period. So basically doubling in that period. Very striking, but worth just saying, a little proviso here. That chart looks quite scary, but now if we zoom out, OK, we're zooming out and looking back, same data, all the way to 2022, and look, you can see we're nowhere near as high as we are there. I mean, certainly this is the highest that we've seen since 2023, and it is a little bit unnerving, well, very unnerving, but it's not as high as it was back then. Even so, this is likely to feed into inflation. It feeds in through your bills. And we'll potentially see it. Already, actually, you've got economists kind of making these forecasts. So this is showing you the cost of living, inflation, the rate at which prices change each year. This is what economists thought might happen back before the war. So inflation getting down towards that level. That's the 2% target the Bank of England needs to try and keep it close to. Now, all of this has happened. They've plugged that into their models, and look at what's changed. They now think inflation of 4% this year, at least this is one group, Pantheon Economics. They think 4% inflation this year, and you can kind of see the moment. So we're not going to face those bill increases immediately, but potentially you see that coming in from July when those new bill increases come through. So that's inflation, and obviously when inflation goes higher, typically the Bank of England tends to respond. This is interest rates, so the interest rates we all pay, or at least this is the Bank of England rate, which then feeds into all of our mortgage costs, savings costs. Right now, 3.75%. We've just had the bank meeting. A lot of people thought they might cut interest rates. Actually, not long ago, economists, investors thought there would be 2 cuts in interest rates this year, but they've said they're not cutting rates, and in fact they've signalled that they're worried about inflation. And as a result, you've got investors out there that think there are going to be 2 increases. So you've gone from 2 cuts, expecting 2 cuts, to now expecting 2 increases this year. It's an extraordinary change in economics. And the final thing to note here, this is showing you UK government borrowing costs, which is basically the debt interest that the government has to pay, which obviously we end up having to pay. So this is a chart that Rachel Reeves will be focused on a lot. Look at what just happened. That has now gone up at the fastest rate that we've seen basically since the mini-budget. So all of these different things layering upon each other, reminding us that what's happening in Iran at the moment is a really significant moment, not just for the economy out there, but for the economy here as well.
Ed Conway there. Well, we've been following the war on the programme all this week with eyewitness reporting from our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. He's one of the few international journalists in Iran right now, the only British one, and he joined Yalda for a bonus episode of the World podcast.
It's so rare to also get access to Iran, especially in this moment. You're handful of journalists who are there at the moment. Just talk us through what it's been like operating there. We talked a little bit about the connectivity issues, having no internet, but just also accessing ordinary people. Are you able to freely talk to people as well?
We're able to talk to anybody we want to and get a pretty clear picture of the impact of what is being done to their neighbourhoods. And I think the point to make is that, the Israelis and Americans say they're using precision targeted strikes, but they are attacking cities. And if you use 2,000-pound bombs in residential areas, whatever you're targeting, you're going to cause a lot of collateral damage in the area around it. And there's no doubt civilians are being badly hurt, many of them being badly injured, and some of them being killed as well. And heartbreaking stories we've found in hospitals here. And people aren't really being, they're not being backward about coming forward, talking about what's happening to them.
And you can watch and follow the full episode of the World Podcast with Yalda by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. Now, Qatar has said its energy exports could take years to recover following Iran's attacks on its oil facilities and has condemned the strikes as aggressive and irresponsible.
Unfortunately, this act of sabotage reflects nothing but an aggressive and irresponsible policy and a dangerous escalation by the Iranian side. This is despite the fact that Qatar, from the very first hour after the Israeli attack on the Iranian energy facility and infrastructure, condemned the attack. Yet Iran's first response to the Israeli attack was to directly target the state of Qatar.
Well, joining me now is defense analyst Rashid Al-Mohannadi. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. First of all, obviously, this has a huge impact on the Gulf states in general, the war, but this attack specifically on Qatar. How do you expect that Qatar and perhaps the other GCC countries will react?
Well, you've seen the statements of the Prime Minister, and I've seen the statements of the Foreign Minister of Saudi yesterday. It's I think, the patient fuse with the Gulf states is coming to a near end. It's has affected and directly affected our economy and livelihood. I think the statement of Trump and that the U.S. and Israel will not target infrastructure in Iran is reassuring, and honestly, civilian infrastructure needs to be protected. But this is a new phase in the war, but we hope that this phase stops, because the repercussions of this will not only be felt in the Gulf. The repercussions of these attacks will be felt globally. We've seen gas prices surge, oil prices surge, but that's the immediate effect. The unimmediate effect that we will sense later is the effect on the fertilizer industry. We've done an analysis, and about 1.1 to 1.7 billion people's food security will be affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, plus the continuous attacks on Gulf oil and gas infrastructure. Additionally, Qatar produces 40% of the market's helium, and helium is a direct feed into the semiconductor and storage industry. Countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, I predict that very soon they would have to issue force majeures when it comes to semiconductor production and electronics. So it's the effects and repercussions will be felt not only in the energy sector, but in all facets of life.
If there is some kind of retaliation or action by the Gulf countries, do you expect there to be any kind of coordination? Because obviously not even that long ago, there was, for example, an animosity, an embargo even, from a lot of the GCC countries towards Qatar. I'm just wondering whether, going forward, if there isn't a de-escalation, or if things keep on getting worse, whether you project that there might be cooperation between the GCC states, all facing effectively a very similar situation.
Well, since the beginning of the war, we've seen a lot of consolidation and cooperation between the Gulf states. And what history tells us is when there's an external threat to the Gulf, the GCC usually stands together. We've seen that during Kuwait, we've seen that during other crises. So whatever is done, it will be done in coordination at the GCC level. I think until now, the GCC has shown great wisdom and restraint. And this is due to good defense planning and the effectiveness of our defense systems. But, restraint has a limit. And I hope that the war stops before that limit ends.
We're often used to President Trump saying one thing and then saying something slightly different. So let me just tell you one thing that he did say on social media, that if Iran continued striking Qatar's energy infrastructure, the U.S. would retaliate, and I'm quoting, and massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars field. If that were to happen, what would be the impact, first of all, on the sort of oil production and the impact across the world, but specifically to the region and the war, do you think?
Well, I think we shouldn't read too much into President Trump's truth posts, but the message we've received that is sent that the U.S. and Israel will not strike Iran's oil infrastructure. That's the message I read from the post. Of course, the South Pars is the North Field, which is the same field both Qatar and Iran benefit from. So blowing up the entire South Pars means blowing up the North Field. But coming to the message sent, and I think that was received by the Iranians, is that from now on there will not be attacks on civilian infrastructure, and I think that's important because civilian infrastructure is usually not as heavily defended as military infrastructure, and it's the soft underbelly of all of our economies and societies.
Just on a final point about Qatar specifically, over the past few decades, it's tried to build itself a legacy using its soft power in negotiations. In the Middle East, there's a lot of cultural events that happen there. The airline trying to turn Qatar into an airline hub, the funding of Al Jazeera. I'm just wondering how much worry you sense that there is in the country that basically, if this continues, its very role in the world is going to change dramatically.
Well, of course, any crisis would affect the trajectory of any state. But, in Qatar, we're very confident of our ability to rebound, rebuild, and the GCC to regroup and rebuild. I think after this war, the GCC has the financial and economic capacity to rebuild their economies and rebuild their positions in the world. In the end, the GCC has shown that they have a high level of resilience in terms of defense, in terms of economy, but most importantly, in making sure that everyday life is carried out normally. And hopefully after this crisis, this would increase investor confidence in the GCC, because if what happened to the GCC happened somewhere else in the world, I think the results would be catastrophic. But the GCC has shown great resilience until now. And I think post-conflict situation will put a lot of economic pressure on GCC states and on Qatar. But they do have, like I said, the economic cushion and financial capacities to rebuild. And we see Qatar's finance rating still sustaining a AA, which shows high confidence in the economy.
Okay. Rashid Al-Mohanadi, defense analyst. So we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
You're watching The World. Coming up next, Sky News investigates claims of possible war crimes taking place in Lebanon.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
The number of people in Lebanon killed by Israeli attacks since the 2nd of March has now passed 1,000. Sky's data and forensics team has been investigating the escalation of Israel's activities in southern Lebanon and the tactics used, which leading human rights groups and lawyers have said could constitute a war crime. Here's our special correspondent, Alex Crawford.
Israel's war on Hezbollah in Lebanon is ramping up, with hundreds of airstrikes, including sending ground troops inside Lebanese territory. And the militant group which supports Iran is continuing to fire rockets into northern Israel. Lebanon is now coping with mass displacement and a rising number of casualties, dead and injured. Israel says it's not going to allow Lebanese residents to return home until the Hezbollah infrastructure is destroyed. So what exactly is Israel doing? How is the war impacting the people of Lebanon? And how legal is any of this? Sky News has been documenting the Israeli military buildup and evacuations in southern Lebanon since October 2023. But since the US and Israel launched their assault on Iran, the Israeli offensive in Lebanon has increased significantly. In little more than 2 weeks, more than 900 people have been killed and in excess of 1 million displaced. And as the Iran war entered its third week, Israel began a ground offensive in Lebanese territory.
The IDF has begun a ground maneuver in Lebanon in order to remove threats and protect the residents of the Galilee in the north.
We've used satellite imagery, verified videos, eyewitness reporting on the ground.
How we will be safe and there is an enemy in our border.
Plus attack and displacement data. We've tracked how Israel's campaign in southern Lebanon is unfolding and their use of tactics which human rights groups and lawyers believe could be war crimes. Israel has justified its actions by saying it is fighting a terror group, and Hezbollah will pay a heavy price for its aggression and activity in the Iranian access to destroy Israel. These red dots represent reports of Israeli strikes compiled by ISW, more than 300 in just 2 weeks. The green dots show reported attacks by Hezbollah. Most of Israel's strikes have been concentrated in southern Lebanon, but there have also been many on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Sky News teams have filmed families who fled the bombings, living on the streets of Beirut in tents and in their cars. The IDF has warned almost half of the capital to evacuate, including the Dahiya neighborhood, which is a stronghold of Hezbollah, but also heavily populated. Those fleeing Beirut's southern suburbs are now being joined by hundreds of thousands from the country's east and the far south, where other evacuation orders have also been issued. All in all, the evacuation orders cover an area home to an estimated 2 million people, more than a third of Lebanon's population. That includes the entire region south of the Zarani River.
What we're seeing is that people are leaving very fast when evacuation orders are announced. Those we have met over the past 2 weeks say that they just got into their car immediately without even collecting some extra clothes out of fear of aerial strikes. One reason many say is because they have experienced the same in 2024.
That fighting formally ended with a ceasefire. This is a de facto temporary border called the Blue Line, which was set up by the UN in 2000. It's a UN-patrolled boundary originally created as a non-combat zone, separating the neighbors. But on the ground, the violence never stopped. Near-daily Israeli strikes during the ceasefire emptied many towns close to the Israeli border. Some were reduced almost entirely to rubble. This map shows the change in nighttime light levels recorded by satellites. Blue shows a decrease in lights since 2023, whilst orange shows an increase. the lights have dimmed in the towns right along Lebanon's border with Israel. That includes the town of Aita al-Shab, where almost all the buildings in the town centre have been destroyed. When Sky visited the town in December, the few residents who remained told us they wanted to rebuild, but IDF attacks on construction equipment was making that impossible.
They don't allow anyone who's building or wants to settle back in Aita al-Shab. We're all civilians. All civilians. Okay, if you have a problem with Hezbollah, go sort it out with Hezbollah. It's not our problem. We're civilians here, and we've got nothing to hide.
An Israeli military official acknowledged the IDF was responsible for widespread destruction in the area, but insisted it only targeted Hezbollah buildings. Human Rights Watch described the attacks on reconstruction equipment as systematic. The group has also documented the repeated use of white phosphorus by Israel, this time over homes in the southern town of Yamor on the 3rd of March. The use of white phosphorus to drive out people, burn land, or fired indiscriminately in populated areas is outlawed under international law.
And I think the use of white phosphorus now is another tactic that is pushing people, out of these towns or making it much harder for them to return as a result of any potential damage that will be caused by the munitions to homes, to agricultural lands.
When approached, the IDF did not deny the use of the chemical in Lebanon in recent weeks. They did admit to owning munitions which contain white phosphorus, but insisted any use is done in accordance with international law. The substance can be used for illumination at night or to create a smokescreen. When used as a weapon, white phosphorus can cause severe burns, and it is illegal to use it indiscriminately in populated areas. Since October 2023, Sky News has documented multiple claims of the IDF using white phosphorus. We've interviewed dozens of residents who say they've seen it being sprayed on their crops, farmland, and amongst their houses. Residents of Kefir Keller showed us pictures from an attack by Israel which looked and acted like white phosphorus at a time when the area was still populated.
They're trying to suffocate us, start fires, and burn all our land. Why do they want to hit us? Why do they want to hit a civilian area? Are they allowed to hit a civilian area?
Residents of the southern town of Kefir Shuba have observed Israeli forces inside the town and using what they believe to be white phosphorus on the outskirts of their community.
When you see the Israeli army in our Lebanese land, you know why he is an enemy. They came to destroy everything, the trees, the land. How we will be safe and there is an enemy in our border.
Those attacks have not only continued, but residents say they've increased. Experts at the defence intelligence company Janes have confirmed to Sky News that this footage that we verified taken in southern Lebanon during the latest escalation shows white phosphorus being fired. The Lebanese Health Ministry says the Israeli military is also targeting medical infrastructure. An Israeli strike killed 12 doctors, paramedics and nurses in a single attack on a medical centre in the Bint Jbeil district on the 13th of March. We've documented several Israeli strikes on Lebanese medical facilities and doctors for more than 2 years. Lebanese doctors have repeatedly told us they believe it's a deliberate strategy to make civilians leave and one they've been trying to resist.
Soldiers can't leave the battle. Doctors, nurses must stay in their hospitals. I don't ask anyone to leave. I never before left Tyre in all the wars.
And you're not scared?
Yes.
In the last 2 weeks, IDF ground activity along the border has been increasing. They've issued their own footage showing troops moving around South Lebanon. And Hezbollah has continued to fire shells into northern Israel. One of the latest landed on a house in Nahariya, with an Israeli spokesperson saying 6 people, including 2 teenage girls, were taken to hospital. Since the last major escalation in 2024, Israel has set up 5 permanent bases inside Lebanon. We saw new Israeli bases under construction when we were with the UN peacekeepers along the de facto border at the end of last year. The UN observers were coming under sporadic attack then from both sides, and they've continued. UNIFIL has warned that any attack on peacekeepers may amount to a war crime. And the presence of Israeli soldiers or any armed combatant in this area contravenes the UN-brokered agreements.
The presence of Israeli forces in South Lebanon is a clear violation. So every instance of that we record, it goes to the Security Council and is reported as a violation.
Recent satellite imagery shared with us by the independent investigative organization Center for Information Resilience shows construction activity at one other site near the border. And it's there, along that border, that the Israeli army has been cementing its presence and starting the latest ground incursion. A military official has told Sky that the IDF is following international law and doing everything it can to avoid harm to civilians. But legal experts we've spoken to have questioned this.
How can you justify the inherent damage that comes from the process of evacuation, as well as the greater risk to which they're apparently going to be exposed by foreseeable or foreseen armed conflict in the area which they will be leaving against a known military objective without very strong evidence, and none's been provided.
So what does that seem to you to say then?
It seems to me to say there's quite a lot of evidence that all of this is unlawful.
Human rights experts and lawyers have once again warned about war crimes by all parties involved in this. But underlining it all is proportionality, where the use of overwhelming violence by a superior military force impacts huge swathes of the country, in this case Lebanon, as well as its population. Then humanitarian lawyers see big red flags. And perhaps most importantly, what politicians and lawyers are viewing as a collapse of the rules-based order. And that has left tens of thousands of people who once lived in South Lebanon with no real idea about when or if they'll ever return home.
Orlaith Minogue is the head of conflict and humanitarian advocacy at Save the Children UK, and she joins us now. Welcome to the programme. The Lebanese Health Ministry says that at least 111 children have been killed in Lebanon since the 2nd of March, more than 1 million people displaced. Save the Children operates in Lebanon right now. Tell us what you're hearing and seeing.
What we're hearing and seeing is every one of those children behind the figures you mentioned is a child either who has lost their life or is currently displaced from their home, removed from any sense of safety, normality, and security. Our staff are telling us that children are sleeping in cars, sleeping in the side of roads, in brick buildings with no heating. They're traumatized, they're frightened, and they're extremely vulnerable to airstrikes, to in taking on dirty water and food that might make them sick. The younger the children are, the more vulnerable they are to this kind of displacement and lack of access to decent care. We also know that families, parents will do anything they can to create some kind of sense of comfort and normality for children. So amidst these terrible stories of children injured and frightened and sleeping on the streets, we also know that families have brought pets with them, taken cats from their home or a pet bird in a cage in order to comfort a child. When the family has been able to take almost nothing with them, they'll do what they can to create some kind of sense of peace for children. But in reality, in Lebanon right now and across much of the region, there is absolutely no peace for children whatsoever.
And the problem is right now that there's no sense really of knowing when they will ever be able to go back. On a practical level, what is it that you can give to these families or the way in which you're trying to help them?
So Save the Children is operational in Lebanon and across much of the region. And in Lebanon, we were able to reach families within 5 hours, actually, of the crisis unfolding, able to distribute blankets and mattresses and baby kits, the kind of items that can help families to endure the initial shock of the displacement. And since then, we've been working across shelters and camps, trying to ensure families get clean water, shelter, those kinds of supplies that are needed. We've been working in Lebanon for a very long time, and we will continue to do so for as long as we can. I would say, though, that aid is, it's reaching families, it's reaching children, but not anything like at the scale and speed at which we would hope, because these ongoing hostilities and insecurity, our staff are, my colleagues are affected by this as well. I have colleagues who have lost families, family members, colleagues who have lost their homes after they've been issued displacement orders. And so, these are people struggling with the impacts of this crisis and insecurity at the same time as they're trying to reach people. We also have funding constraints and rising operational costs that will also be a huge challenge in this response.
And we're 3 weeks into this war, but just looking at nearby Syria, we know that sometimes it can, of course, go on for years and years, and the trauma of the children and the lack of education has a huge impact. Another war that's ongoing is Sudan, and I know that you were there quite recently. Just tell us a little bit about the families that you managed to speak to there and what the situation is like in that country.
Yes, absolutely. I was in Sudan in recent weeks, where the scale of humanitarian need and the violence that has been inflicted on children over the past 3 years is truly unimaginable and devastating. Children have experienced and continue to experience extreme violence, restrictions around their ability to access aid, to have any access to education. The health services have come close to collapse in Sudan, and parts of the country are at risk of famine. It's genuinely hard to overstate just how severe the crisis is there. And when you meet people, which I have been fortunate to do, their stories are just, they're the stuff of nightmares. Families traipsing for days, if not weeks, to escape extreme violence, having lost children, having seen children killed and violence inflicted upon them, traveling across the country in search of safety, in case they can end up in displacement camps. I met one family in a camp where, one child had been lost, 2 disabled children had been carried on a mother's back across the country, and they were experiencing, very little access to services and
unfortunately,
where they arrived. Save the Children is doing more people and to meet that need, but the challenges are incredible. As a result of this escalation across the Middle East, those challenges and that crisis will in fact become even worse, which is difficult to imagine. Save the Children currently has a shipment of medical supplies intended for Sudan.
Madam, I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, but we're going to have to move on because of time pressures. But thank you so much for sharing your views and your experiences both in Lebanon and in Sudan. Orla Minogue, Head of Conflict and Humanitarian Advocacy at Save the Children. Now, coming up next on The World, the first Palestinian fatalities in the war after a beauty salon on the West Bank was hit by an Iranian missile.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. James Matthews from Sky News. Can I ask, why was Ghislaine Maxwell invited to your daughter Chelsea Clinton's wedding in 2010? Maria, did you offer to President Trump your Nobel Peace Prize?
I presented the President of the United States the medal.
Free, wherever you get your news.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
David Cameron says that you should vote through funding for Ukraine. What do you say to that?
I really don't care what David Cameron has to say.
Did you stay at the apartment of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Mr. Patel, did you endanger public safety when you said the killer was in custody? Mr. Hexter, does your past behaviour make you unfit to serve?
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block. James Matthews, Sky News.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir? James Matthews from Sky News, Mr. Mamdani.
I have to be honest, when you said you were from Sky News, I just got very excited. Could you repeat the question one more time?
We're rolling.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Welcome to the world.
Come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? This is the war game.
There were a number of armed security.
We want to discover, to find out what's really going on.
Everything you need to know about British politics in about 20 minutes.
I actually don't like political drama.
So, where next?
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway, Sky News. Is anyone going to talk to us?
Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office.
Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is why it hasn't been stopped.
Well, let's turn our attention to the West Bank now, where at least 3 Palestinian women have been killed and 8 more injured when a beauty salon was hit during an Iranian missile attack. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi was at the scene.
It came from nowhere, captured on CCTV, the moment of impact and the explosion that followed. 4 women were killed at this beauty salon in the town of Beit Awa, near Hebron, in the occupied West Bank. This is where it impacted, and it's not clear whether this is from a cluster munition warhead or from the intercept. Accounts vary. But you can see the damage, the shrapnel on the side of the hut. Inside, the women were getting ready for the celebration of Eid. But the damage goes far beyond this, the shrapnel even hitting the buildings behind. This is an image of 3 of the women. In the middle, Sahira Maselme, one of the owners of the salon. She was 35. They are the first Palestinians killed in this war. What's happened here has shattered this community. There's a real sense of shock. Now, there are still plenty of people here, and we're told that one of the injured women is still around, and we're going to try and have a word with her now. Hadil was badly wounded. She told me what she remembers.
Sahira, my partner, may she rest in peace, told me the sound we heard was thunder. 5 minutes later, it turned into a very loud explosion that ended up hitting us. The strike hit the area where Sahira and some of the other girls were, and they were killed. Everyone loved her. There wasn't a single person who didn't.
Thousands have poured onto the streets here for the funerals, the air heavy with grief. The women were well known in the community. This wasn't the target of the ballistic missile, but people in these West Bank communities feel stuck in the middle because they're under the flight path of the missiles coming from Iran towards central Israel, but they're intercepted often in these areas. But unlike in Israel, most people can't hear sirens, they don't get any warnings, and there isn't really anywhere here to take shelter. Many residents here say they feel increasingly vulnerable, living under the shadow of a war with no clear ends.
Only settlements get sirens, not Palestinians, leaving people here exposed and unprotected. When something happens, they often go outside to watch.
Since the conflict began, uncertainty has gripped the West Bank. The deaths here come amid already heightened tensions, with ongoing military raids and a rise in settler attacks.
For many here, the question is no longer if they are at risk, but when they might be safe. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Now, 5 members of Iran's national women's football team who applied for asylum in Australia and then changed their mind returned home today. The team refused to sing the national anthem during the opening game at the Women's Asian Cup and were described by some Iranian commentators as traitors. 7 team members sought refuge in Australia, but only 2 of them stayed. Human rights activists say Iran pressured the women by making threats against their families. This evening, they were welcomed home as heroes. Well, that is it for the program tonight. Thank you for watching. Yalda will be back on Monday, and The Wrap with Gillian Joseph is up next. Good night.